The radar lit up like a Christmas tree. 5, no, 6 bogies closing fast from the east. I was alone up there, 30,000 feet above the Black Sea. Just me and my F-16. Command had gone silent 20 minutes ago, and that's when I knew something was terribly wrong. Maintain patrol pattern, they'd said. Reinforcements inbound. But those reinforcements never came. I checked my fuel gauge, barely enough to engage, let alone make it back to base. My heart was pounding against my chest as I made the call that would change everything. I banked hard right and cut my afterburners. Sometimes survival means becoming invisible before they even know you're there. I've been flying combat missions for 15 years, but nothing prepares you for that moment when you realize you're completely on your own. The intelligence briefing that morning had mentioned increased activity, but nothing like this. 6 MiG-29s don't just appear by accident. Someone knew I'd be there. Someone wanted me there. As I descended to 15,000 feet, using the cloud cover for concealment, I replayed the mission parameters in my head. Standard reconnaissance, they said. Routine patrol, they said. My squadron commander's final words echoed in my mind. Just keep your eyes open, Johnson. Something doesn't feel right about this one. He was right. And now I was facing the consequences of trusting too easily. The first missile lock warning screamed through my helmet. They'd found me despite my evasive maneuvers. What happened next was pure instinct, the kind they can't teach you in flight school. I pitched up violently, pulling 9GS, blood rushing from my head as my vision narrowed to a pinpoint. The missile streaked past my left wing, close enough that I could have reached out and touched it. I rolled inverted and dove straight down, the altimeter unwinding at a terrifying rate. The ocean was coming up fast, too fast. At 3,000 feet, I pulled back on the stick with every ounce of strength I had left. The airframe groaned in protest, warning lights flashing across my console. Something was wrong with the hydraulics. The stick felt heavy, unresponsive. That's when I realized this wasn't just an ambush. Someone had tampered with my aircraft. I managed to level out at 1,200 feet, skimming the waves, but I was burning fuel at an alarming rate. The enemy formation had split up, for above me, 2 somewhere behind. They were herding me, like wolves driving prey toward the kill zone. My radio crackled to life, startling me after so much silence. Falcon 3, this is home plate. Authentication code Sierra Echo 7. The voice was unfamiliar, tense. Negative contact, I responded, my throat dry. Repeat authentication. There was a pause that seemed to stretch forever. Johnson, get out there now. Your aircraft has been compromised. That's an order. The voice belonged to Colonel Matthews, not for my squadron, but for military intelligence. How did he know? And more importantly, what did he know that I didn't about why I was suddenly the most wanted man in enemy airspace? Compromised? I repeated, my mind racing faster than my jet. What the hell does that mean? The radio crackled with static before Matthews responded. Your navigation system has been feeding your coordinates to the enemy for the past hour. Someone on our side wants you shot down. The realization hit me harder than any G-force I'd ever experienced. This wasn't just an ambush, it was betrayal. I quickly disabled the navigation suite, going analog in a digital world. The MiGs were still circling, searching for me in the low cloud cover. I had to think fast. My training officer's words from years ago surfaced in my memory. When everything fails, remember the basics: altitude, airspeed, and adversary position. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways, especially when modern technology becomes your enemy. I cut west toward a small archipelago I remembered from the mission brief, a place to hide, to think. With my NAV system compromised, I relied on visual landmarks and the sun's position. The islands appeared through breaks in the clouds, offering salvation in their jagged coastlines and deep inlets. Perfect for losing radar lock. I dropped to 50 feet above the water, feeling the spray kick up against my canopy as I threaded between 2 rocky outcroppings. The enemy pilots wouldn't risk following me through such terrain. Not at this speed, not with their heavier aircraft. Behind me, I caught glimpses of contrails as they maintained higher altitude, trying to track my movements from above. They knew I'd have to emerge eventually. What they didn't know was that I had no intention of playing by anyone's rules now. Tucked into a narrow bay, I cut the engines to idle and took stock of my situation. Fuel, 40 minutes at economical cruise. Weapons, 2 air-to-air missiles and the cannon, with 200 rounds. Communications, compromised but still functional if I needed a last call home. And then there was the small matter of the black box beneath my seat, the one Matthews had mentioned in his final transmission before the radio went silent again. Whatever happens, protect the package. I hadn't been briefed on any package. Reaching down between flight maneuvers, my fingers found an unfamiliar edge under the seat. I pried open a hidden compartment that shouldn't have existed on a standard F-16. Inside was a small metallic case with diplomatic seals and biometric locks. What was I carrying? And who in our own ranks wanted it destroyed badly enough to sacrifice a pilot? The decision came down to impossible choices. Try to reach friendly airspace with dwindling fuel and a compromised aircraft, or ditch in neutral territory and protect whatever secrets I was unknowingly transporting. As I weighed these options, a shadow passed overhead. One of the MiGs had broken formation, flying dangerously low. He was hunting alone now. Bold move. Risky. I could use that against him. I powered up just enough to maintain systems without revealing my position on thermal. Through my canopy, I could see his underside as he banked above the bay. Russian markings, but something wasn't right about them. The insignia looked fresh, too perfect. These weren't regular forces. These were contractors or something worse. And suddenly, the stakes of my mission became clearer. What I was carrying wasn't just sensitive, it was world-changing. The kind of intelligence that starts or prevents wars. The lone MiG made another pass, lower this time. He knew I was here. Maybe he had better thermal imaging than I'd given him credit for. Or maybe he was just persistent. Either way, my hiding time was up. I gripped the throttle, saying a silent prayer as I slammed it forward. The engines roared to life, and I burst from the bay like a missile from its tube. The enemy pilot had no time to react. I was beneath him before he could bank away. In that split second, I had a clear shot at his exhaust. One burst from my cannon was all it would take. But something made me hesitate. The black box, the betrayal. None of this added up. What if these enemies weren't enemies at all? What if I was being manipulated into starting something bigger? My finger eased off the trigger as I rocketed past him, close enough to see the pilot's startled expression through his visor. That moment of mercy nearly cost me everything. The MiG recovered quickly and was on my tail within seconds, his weapons systems locking onto my heat signature. I jinked hard right, then left, burning precious fuel as I tried to shake him. The warning tone in my helmet became a constant scream as he maintained the lock. Come on, I muttered, pushing my damaged aircraft beyond its limits. The hydraulic problems were getting worse, my control surfaces responding with increasing sluggishness. Through gritted teeth, I executed a split-S maneuver, inverting the aircraft and pulling down toward the ocean in a half-loop. The G-forces crushed me into my seat as darkness crept into the edges of my vision. At the bottom of the maneuver, I pulled level just above the waves, feeling rather than seeing the MiG overshoot above me. I had seconds, not minutes, to make a decision that would change the course of not just my life, but potentially international relations. The black box felt like it was burning a hole through my seat now. What was so important that both sides would risk open conflict over it? Using the momentary advantage, I climbed rapidly back to 10,000 feet, scanning for the rest of the enemy formation. They had regrouped to the east, clearly communicating with their comrade, who'd nearly had me. Then my radio crackled again. Falcon 3, this is home plate actual. It was a new voice, older, authoritative. General Westmore himself, theater commander. We are tracking your situation. Be advised, you are carrying critical evidence of illegal weapons testing. Multiple nations want it destroyed. Trust no one until you reach checkpoint Delta. Authentication code, Broken Arrow. Broken Arrow, the code for a nuclear incident. My blood ran cold as the implications sank in. What exactly was I carrying? Evidence of a nuclear test? Weapons designs? I banked toward the coordinates embedded in the authentication code. A small military outpost on a neutral island about 200 miles southwest. I might just have enough fuel to make it if I could shake my pursuers. The main formation was closing fast, and my earlier encounter was rejoining them. 6 against 1, with my aircraft damaged and fuel critical. The odds were impossible. But then again, the best pilots don't believe in odds. We believe in skill, instinct, and sometimes, just sometimes, the element of surprise. I dove back toward the archipelago, a desperate plan forming in my mind. If I couldn't outrun them or outfight them, perhaps I could outsmart them. After all, they wanted the black box destroyed, which meant they'd follow me anywhere, even into a trap. The islands below offered a deadly maze of narrow passages and vertical cliff faces, a pilot's nightmare or salvation, depending on your skill and desperation. I was heavy on both. Dropping to treetop level, I slalomed between rocky spires, the stick fighting me every inch of the way. The hydraulic failure was spreading through the control systems. Each turn required more strength, more concentration. Behind me, only 2 of the MiGs followed into the labyrinth. The others maintained height, circling like vultures. Smart. They were conserving energy and options while their braver, or more foolish, comrades did the dirty work. The first pursuer was good, matching my turns with professional precision. The second was hesitant, falling behind. I needed to eliminate at least one of them to have any chance of reaching checkpoint Delta. I rounded a limestone cliff and cut power, dropping almost to stall speed in an instant. The maneuver was insane, bordering on suicidal, but it worked. The lead MiG overshot me by mere feet, his surprised eyes visible through his canopy as he passed. I rammed the throttle forward and climbed sharply, getting into position behind him. No hesitation this time. I squeezed the trigger. My cannon rounds tore into his right wing, sending pieces of metal cartwheeling through the air. He didn't explode, didn't crash, just banked away trailing smoke, no longer a threat. One down. The second pursuer wisely broke off, climbing back to the safety of his formation. For a moment, there was silence in my cockpit except for my own ragged breathing. I bought myself a few minutes, nothing more. The damage reports were piling up on my console. Hydraulic pressure dropping, fuel system compromised, right aileron control intermittent. The aircraft was dying around me. Checkpoint Delta was still 150 miles away. I didn't have the fuel, and even if I did, the enemy formation would intercept me long before I reached it. I needed a new plan. The black box seemed to weigh heavier with each passing second. Whatever it contained had already cost lives and might cost many more. That's when the realization hit me. They didn't need me alive. They didn't even need my aircraft intact. They just needed the black box destroyed. And sometimes, to win the game, you have to change the rules entirely. I reached beneath my seat and removed the mysterious package, securing it inside my survival vest. Then I did something no pilot ever wants to do. I prepared to abandon my aircraft. Home plate, this is Falcon 3. I transmitted, not caring anymore who might be listening. Aircraft critically damaged. AM executing Protocol 7. There was a long pause before Westmore's voice returned, understanding immediately what I was planning. Confirmed, Falcon 3. Friendly assets are mobilizing for recovery. Protocol 7. The emergency destruction of sensitive equipment and intelligence, followed by pilot extraction. In simple terms, ditch the plane, destroy what you can, and run like hell until friendlies find you. I set the autopilot to maintain course, rigged what remained of my weapon systems to detonate on impact, and took one last look at the cockpit that had been my home for countless missions. Then I reached between my legs, grabbed the ejection handle, and whispered, "See you in hell." The canopy blasted away, and a second later, I was catapulted into the open air at 400 knots, the black box secured against my chest. The game had changed. Now I wasn't a pilot anymore. I was a courier, and the real mission was just beginning. The ejection was violent, as it always is. Nothing prepares you for the shock of going from a controlled environment to the merciless grasp of high-altitude winds in a split second. My body slammed against the airstream, the G-forces threatening to tear me apart before the parachute deployed with a crack like a gunshot. Below me, my F-16 continued on its programmed course, flying ghost-like toward the open sea. The enemy fighters circled it cautiously, perhaps suspecting a trap. They were right to be suspicious. When the jet finally ran out of fuel 3 minutes later, the fail-safe-eyed rig detonated what remained of my missiles, creating a fireball visible for miles. From my swinging vantage point beneath the parachute canopy, it looked like any evidence of the black box had been destroyed in the explosion. That should buy me some time as I drifted toward the largest island in the chain. The landing was rough. Parachute training rarely accounts for densely forested islands with jagged terrain. I hit the tree canopy hard, the branches clawing at my flight suit as I crashed through layer after layer of foliage. My shoulder slammed into a thick trunk, sending a bolt of pain down my left side. Probably dislocated. The parachute snagged above me, leaving me dangling 15 feet above the ground. Using my good arm, I released the harness and dropped the remaining distance, rolling as I hit to distribute the impact. Pain flared throughout my body, but nothing seemed broken. The survival kit from my ejection seat had landed nearby. Water, first aid, emergency beacon, sidearm. But I couldn't use the beacon yet. Not until I knew who was coming to find me, friend or foe. Night was falling rapidly as I oriented myself using the stars. Checkpoint Delta lay to the southwest, perhaps a 2-day journey on foot across difficult terrain. And I wasn't alone on this island. The explosion of my aircraft would have been seen by locals and possibly by enemy ground forces stationed in the region. I needed to move quickly but cautiously. After resetting my dislocated shoulder against a tree, a pain so intense I nearly blacked out, I concealed the parachute and began making my way through the dense undergrowth. The black box remained secure in my survival vest, its weight a constant reminder of my responsibility. Whatever secrets it contained, people were willing to kill for them, or die to protect them. And somewhere above me, enemy aircraft were still circling, their pilots no doubt radioing for ground support to search the islands. The first gunshots came just after midnight, distant but unmistakable. Search parties were on the island, using flares to illuminate the dense forest. I froze in place, pressing myself against the damp earth as a flare burst overhead, casting ghostly shadows through the trees. They were being thorough, methodical. These weren't local militia or even regular forces. Their movement patterns suggested special operations training. I counted at least 3 separate teams converging on my position, using grid search techniques. My military training kicked in. When surrounded, find the weakest point in the perimeter and punch through. I studied their movements for another hour, identifying a gap between 2 teams to the south. That would be my escape route. But first, I needed a diversion, something to draw their attention elsewhere while I slipped away. And as I lay there in the mud, the solution came to me in the form of the emergency beacon in my survival kit. Sometimes the best place to hide is right where they expect to find you. I crawled to a position about half a mile from my planned escape route, moving inches at a time to avoid detection. The search teams were getting closer, their voices occasionally carrying through the night air, some English, some Russian, some languages I couldn't identify. This wasn't a standard military operation anymore. It was something else entirely. Reaching a small clearing, I activated the emergency beacon and wedged it into the fork of a tree, about head height. Then I removed my knife and cut my palm, smearing blood on nearby leaves and the ground beneath the beacon. The blood trail would make the scene more convincing, a wounded pilot desperately signaling for rescue. I took the black box and moved away quickly, counting on the searchers to converge on the decoy while I slipped through their lines to the south. The diversion worked better than I could have hoped. Within 20 minutes, shouts and increased radio chatter indicated they'd found the beacon. Flashlight beams converged on the clearing as I made my move, using the noise of their excitement to mask the sounds of my movement through the underbrush. I covered nearly 2 miles before dawn, putting valuable distance between myself and the search parties. But my situation remained dire. The island was larger than I'd initially thought, perhaps 15 miles across at its widest point. Checkpoint Delta was still at least a day's journey away, across increasingly mountainous terrain. My shoulder throbbed with each step, and the humidity of the jungle had soaked through my flight suit, causing painful chafing wherever the fabric rubbed against skin. But physical discomfort was the least of my worries. The search would intensify once they realized I wasn't at the beacon. As the sun rose, I found myself at the edge of a small freshwater stream, a lifeline in this hostile environment. I refilled my canteen and treated the water with purification tablets from my survival kit. The cool liquid was heaven against my parched throat. Taking stock of my situation, I realized I needed more than just evasion tactics. I needed intelligence. Who exactly was pursuing me? What factions were involved? And most importantly, who could I really trust when I reached Checkpoint Delta? The black box might hold those answers, but I had no way to access its biometrically sealed contents. As I rested briefly, concealed in a natural depression beneath tree roots, a distant sound caught my attention. Helicopter rotors, growing steadily louder. They were escalating the search, bringing in air assets. Time was running out faster than I'd anticipated. I covered myself with mud and vegetation for camouflage as the helicopter made its first pass overhead, its downdraft violently shaking the forest canopy. Through gaps in the leaves, I caught glimpses of the aircraft, not military but a civilian model repurposed for search operations. Unusual for a covert mission. Even more unusual was the insignia on its side. Not Russian or American, but the logo of Meridian Security Solutions, a private military contractor known for taking contracts from the highest bidder. The pieces were starting to fit together. This wasn't a nation-state conflict. It was a corporate operation with military backing. Someone had discovered something they shouldn't have, something documented in the black box I was carrying. And now multiple interests were scrambling to control the information. Government, military, corporate. The lines were blurred, and I was caught in the middle. As the helicopter circled back for another pass, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Reaching Checkpoint Delta was only the beginning. The real question was what would happen once I got there. By midday, the heat had become oppressive, turning the island forest into a steam bath. My flight suit, designed for high-altitude conditions, not jungle survival, was becoming a liability. I stripped down on my t-shirt, using pieces of the suit to wrap the black box more securely and create a makeshift sling for my injured arm. The helicopter had made 3 more passes, each time flying a different search pattern. They were being thorough, professional. On the last pass, they dropped personnel at various points around the island, blocking positions, cutting off potential escape routes. They were tightening the noose, and they had the manpower and equipment to do it effectively. My only advantage was knowledge. They didn't know exactly what I knew or what I suspected about the nature of this operation. The stream I'd been following began to widen, eventually opening into a small inland lake nestled between rising hills. From my concealed position at the water's edge, I spotted something unexpected. A small village on the far shore, perhaps a dozen simple structures with fishing boats pulled up on the beach. Civilization meant risk, but also opportunity. I needed supplies, information, and possibly transportation if I was going to reach Checkpoint Delta. Watching the village through improvised shade for over an hour, I saw no signs of military presence or unusual activity. Just locals going about their daily routines, unaware of the high-stakes game playing out across their island. I made my decision as the afternoon sun began its descent. Under cover of approaching darkness, I would make my way to the village. Not to make contact with the locals that would put them in danger, but to appropriate what I needed when they were sleeping. Night fell, bringing with it a symphony of insect sounds and the distant calling of night birds. I moved silently along the shoreline, staying within the tree line for cover. The village was quiet now, lights glowing softly from some of the windows. As I drew closer, movement on the water caught my attention, a boat approaching the village from the open sea. I froze, watching as it docked. The men who disembarked weren't locals. Their movements were disciplined, purposeful. Military. They gathered in the center of the village, conferring with someone, an older man who appeared to be a village elder. Money changed hands. Then they produced photographs pointing toward the hills. They were questioning locals about me, setting up a network of informants. The net was tightening even faster than I'd feared. My plan to raid the village for supplies was no longer viable. I needed a new strategy, and quickly. The military team. I counted 6 operators, professionally equipped, spread out through the village, setting up what appeared to be a forward operating base. They had communications equipment, weapons, and enough supplies for an extended operation. This wasn't just a search party. It was an extraction team prepared for multiple scenarios. As I weighed my options, a flicker of movement to my right startled me. A young boy, no more than 12, staring at me with wide eyes from between the trees. Before I could react, he turned and ran, not toward the village but deeper into the forest. He'd seen me, but he wasn't alerting the soldiers. That was unexpected. Cursing silently, I followed him, moving as quickly as I dared through the underbrush. If he told anyone about me, my presence would be confirmed and the search would intensify. But something told me this boy wasn't running to inform on me. He was running away from the soldiers too. And that made me wonder what exactly had happened on this island before I arrived. What connection did it have to the black box I was carrying? The boy might have answers I desperately needed. I tracked the boy through the darkening forest, his knowledge of the terrain giving him a significant advantage. Several times I nearly lost him, only to catch a glimpse of movement ahead that kept me on his trail. After about 20 minutes, I realized he was leading me deliberately, his path too direct, his occasional pauses too perfectly timed for me to catch sight of him again. This was no random encounter. Finally, he disappeared into what looked like solid rock, a hidden entrance to a cave system, cleverly concealed by vegetation. I approached cautiously, hand on my sidearm. "I know you're in there," I called softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." There was a long silence before a voice replied. Not the boy's, but a woman's, her English heavily accented. "You're the pilot, the one they're hunting. Come inside, quickly, before they track you here." The cave opened into a larger chamber lit by a small fire. The woman was perhaps 40, with intelligent eyes and the weathered look of someone who'd spent her life outdoors. The boy stood beside her, along with 2 other children and an elderly man. "My name is Nadia," she said. "We have been expecting someone like you." She gestured for me to sit. "The men who came today, they're not the first. There have been others, watching the skies, setting up equipment in the mountains." She pointed to the black box secured against my chest. "They're looking for what you carry, yes." I nodded cautiously, still unsure whether to trust these people. The old man spoke rapidly in their local language, and Nadia translated. "My father says your aircraft was not the first to fall. 3 weeks ago, another crashed in the mountains. The men came very quickly to take it away, but not before my father saw what it had been doing." "What do you mean, what it had been doing?" I asked, accepting a cup of water from one of the children. Nadia exchanged glances with her father before answering. "Testing weapons. Over the ocean. Weapons that made the sky burn and the fish die." A cold feeling settled in my stomach as the pieces clicked into place. The black box likely contained sensor data and video evidence of illegal weapons testing, possibly nuclear, possibly something worse. Tests conducted where they thought no one would see, in international waters near these remote islands. But someone had seen, and someone else had discovered the evidence and arranged for it to be smuggled out on my aircraft with me as an unwitting courier. The sabotage, the ambush, the private military contractors, it all made sense now. Multiple parties were trying to either expose or bury evidence of a serious international crime. "Checkpoint Delta," I said. "Do you know this place?" Nadia nodded. "It is an old weather station on the southern tip of the island, but it is no longer safe. The men who hunt you, they have been there for 2 days already." This news hit me like a physical blow. My extraction point was compromised. There would be no friendly forces waiting to secure the black box and guarantee its evidence reached the proper authorities. In fact, I no longer knew who the proper authorities even were. If high-level military commanders were involved in the conspiracy, who could I trust? Nadia seemed to read my thoughts. "There is another way off the island," she said. "A fishing boat. My cousin can take you to the mainland tomorrow night." I weighed my options, painfully aware that each passing hour increased the risk to these innocent people who were helping me. The black box felt heavier than ever against my chest. The mission had changed yet again. Now, it wasn't just about delivering intelligence. It was about ensuring justice for what had happened here, regardless of which governments or corporations were implicated.